Well, it is a great day to be in the house of the Lord. And I want to welcome you to New Day today. And if you are joining us online, whether now or later, you picked a perfect time to peer into the life of New Day and to watch a message, because we are starting a brand new series today simply titled, Is God Real? And I want to preach to you a message today titled, Is God Real? And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of a weird sermon to preach in a church, right? Is God real? It's like, of course we believe God is real. We're in church. That's why we're here, right? Like, we come to church because we believe God is real. And the church is a place where they believe that God is real. And yet we have to talk about this because what we know in our culture is that belief in God is not going up. Globally, faith in God is actually increasing, or belief in a God is, but in our Western culture, faith in God is decreasing. And if I'm honest, I think maybe one of the reasons why in the church we don't talk about this topic about is God real isn't because we have too much faith, but because I think often maybe we have too much doubt. We're afraid to bring this question that everyone's asking out into the open and consider it in church because we're afraid that maybe people won't believe. And that wouldn't be good for the church, now would it? And yet as the church, if we really know that God is real, if we believe that fully, then to bring this conversation out is actually good for us because we believe that people will see that God is real and give their life to Him. If the truth is really on our side, then we should bring this out for people to consider because we have nothing to hide. And so I want to speak to two types of people today. And maybe you're in one of these two camps. The first is the skeptic or the unbeliever. And I want to be really clear today. I know we're in church and I know I'm a pastor. I get that, right? But I want you to know this today. If you're a skeptic or unbeliever, today I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm not asking you to just take my word for it today or just take what the Bible says. I hope you look this stuff up. I'm not saying just hear what I say today and yeah, don't Google it and don't read about it, don't research it for yourself. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying I hope what happens today begins to spark a conversation and an interest in your life because I want you to look up the research and the philosophy about if God is really real. If you're a skeptic today, I just want you to hear my words, to listen to what I'm saying and consider what I'm saying. I'm not demanding that you believe that God is real. I'm simply asking you to be open to the fact that He might be real, even if for a long time in your life you've believed otherwise. And when I talk to skeptics or unbelievers or people who wouldn't consider themselves religious, one of the interesting things I've noticed, and maybe you're the exception, and maybe you're a skeptic and you're super well-read and all that kind of stuff, and you think all the deep stuff, but most people I know that aren't believers, they've just never really thought about it much. They've never considered the things that we're going to talk about in this series. They've never really pondered it. They've never really leaned in or researched or drawn near to the faith or the church. They just kind of are going with the flow in life and culture. And the general flow is secularism. And so today I think there's going to be a lot of things that you really need to consider. And so if you're a skeptic, I just ask that you be open today. And maybe you're in this room and maybe you're a believer, or maybe you're watching online and you're a believer. You're not a skeptic. You do believe in God. If you're in church, you believe that Jesus is Lord. But you have a hidden thing about you, a hidden truth. And you might not have ever told anyone about this. But I know something about you, that sometimes you have questions, and sometimes you have doubts. And you could have been in the church for 80 years, and there are moments where that thought pops in your mind. Is God like real, like for real? Not just like, do we believe it's a good thing to believe, so let's just kind of go with it. It's got some benefits. It's good for community and morality. Let's just kind of go with it, right? Like, there are moments where you wonder about it, like, for real. My daughter does this thing now because we joke all the time and we play games, and sometimes, we'll kind of like, I guess technically like lie in the name of joking around. Like, I'm like, I didn't get you a donut, but I really did get her a donut kind of thing, And so my daughter has learned that when we're talking, if she really wants to know the truth, she's like 5. She's like, Dad, for real? She's like, for real? You know, I don't know where she got that from, but like, she's like, there's a moment where she's like, okay, is this really real? And sometimes even as believers, we ask that. But can I speak to you something today that I think even most Christians don't know? That your doubt isn't dirty. It's not dirty. It's not something that God can't work with. So often we feel like we're not allowed to doubt, we're not allowed to have questions as believers, and so even if I don't understand something, let's just kind of go with it because we feel doubt, and then we feel ashamed of our doubt, and then what do humans do when we have shame? We hide. And so we have these questions for all these years, and we feel like we can't ask those questions in the church or in community, you know, like you're probably not going to be like in small group or Bible study and you're going around and, you know, Sally's talking about how her job's hard. They come to you. It's like, how are you doing, John? Like, I don't know if God's real this week. You know, like that's not normally where you're going to go, right? So we just kind of keep it to ourselves. But what we see in the scriptures is that some of the biggest characters in the Bible had major doubts that they worked through. And we see the way in the Gospels that Jesus interacts with doubt and unbelief. And I just want to tell you today that he's patient. The psalm we just sang a minute ago, it says, you understand me. It says, I believe, but help my unbelief. You understand me. What that's talking about is like God gets it when you've got questions because you live in a broken world and things are messed up. And sometimes we doubt. That your doubt isn't dirty. And in fact, if you handle your doubt in a healthy and biblical way, that your doubt can actually draw you closer to God and closer in your faith. That your doubt isn't meant to draw you away from God or to walk away from God, but it's an invitation to come closer to him and to get to know him in new and fresh ways. And so before we dive in today and before I share with you, today's gonna be more of like a lecture probably than a sermon, but it's really important stuff for us to consider. Before we do, I want to share with you just like a story in my own life that I think kind of shares with my story. When I was a senior in high school, I had grown up in the church, and at that point I was a leader in my youth group. I was like the worship leader kind of guy and in my youth group, and it was really random. I remember where I was in my living room, senior in high school, about to go to college, 18 years old, and it was really random. I'm just like watching the news one night by myself in a room, 18 years old, and out of nowhere, this thought pops into my mind. Is God really real? And I'd been walking with Jesus for years, and I'd been a believer for years, and I was all in, and I loved the church. I didn't have church hurt, and nobody had wronged me. It wasn't anything like that. I just randomly had this question. I don't know if it was a God thing or an attack. I don't know, but I just had this question, and it led me into like a year of really thinking seriously about my faith. And it was at a unique time because I'm heading off to college. And so, man, I went into college, moved out on my own, and I was still a believer. I still loved the church. But, man, I just had some questions. And I went to college really open-minded. And I made the decision for myself that, listen, I'm not just going to believe this because I grew up believing it or because I was told to believe it or my parents believed it or just because I'm kind of helping out at a church. Like, if I'm going to follow Jesus, if I'm going to be a believer in God, that I really want to know that I believe. And I can tell you today that when I drew near to God and opened and asked the questions and studied every side of the issue, I genuinely got to this place in my life where I realized, man, I don't just believe because I was told to believe. Like, I've literally considered both sides and everything, believing in God or not believing in God, and I literally actually believe in God. That when I consider life without God and reality without God, honestly, to me, that doesn't really make much sense. And I ain't just saying that because I'm a pastor. I really believe that. And I want to share with you today one of the apologetics or the arguments that was very helpful in my journey. But before I do that, I want to tell you this really quick as you consider this issue, as you study it for yourself. If you're here, maybe you're a skeptic or you're an unbeliever. This is an important thing to know. In philosophy, will tell you this. Is that I cannot give you a definitive proof. That's one of the reasons why the Bible calls us to faith. Faith is a part of this. But what's important to note, right, because I think sometimes like Christianity gets unfairly scrutinized in our culture because for a long time Christianity has been the dominant worldview, and so I would say it's like kind of like Nickelback, like it gets so popular that everyone just hates on it. Listen, And listen, I ain't saying Nickelback's the best band, but there's a lot of bands worse than Nickelback, okay? Like, that's for sure, okay? I can show you some. Just come hit me up after service, okay? But Christianity's kind of like that in our culture where it gets so popular and it's so assumed that it's kind of easy to take a shot, at it. And so Christianity gets all this scrutiny and, what about this and what about that? And we never scrutinize atheism. What about this or what about that? Or that doesn't make sense. Or agnosticism or Buddhism or whatever it is, right? And so a lot of us have had our faith in Christianity really kind of run through the ringer by hard questions, and we've never actually gone on the offensive and said, well, let's think about atheism and what that means. And if I believe that, coherently, how should I live my life? We never asked that question. And for me, when I began to ask those questions, that's actually what drew me back to my faith in Christianity. And so what I want to tell you today, what's important as we consider this, is that literally no matter what worldview you hold, you have to hear this today. As you have conversations with people, this is important to note. Everything you can believe, every worldview is a mixture of reason and faith. Every one. Atheism, agnosticism, Buddhism, Christianity, you name it. There's not one of these yeah. Every worldview has reason and faith. And so what that means is that we should look at the reasoning. But we should also know that at some point it will always require faith. And we believe because God designed it that way. As we think about this, it kind of reminds me of in John chapter 6 when there's followers that are walking away from Jesus, and he looks to the followers that are still with him and he says, y'all want to go too? And one of the followers so profoundly says, to where else will we go? You have the words of life. They said, hey, listen, we've looked at all the other options, and it's not better. And so even today, as we consider whatever we believe, we can't just disbelieve one thing. We have to really understand what we believe. And I think for a lot of people, whether atheist or agnostic, they've often never really considered what that actually would mean for their life. So today I want to talk to you about the cosmological argument. Turn to somebody and say, cosmological. It makes me feel smart when I say that. Cosmological argument. And I'm excited to teach on this because, as I said earlier, this was very influential in my journey. When I had questions, this was one of the main arguments or apologetics. The word apologetics just means a defense for existence, the belief of God or Christianity specifically. An apologetic is a defense of faith. And this is one of the best apologetics, and there's a lot we could talk about, and I can't talk about all of them, but this one was very instrumental in my journey. And actually, as we're going to talk about today, science in the 20th century actually has made this argument even better and even stronger, and I can't wait to share that with you. But the cosmological argument, it'll be up on the screen behind me, is simply this. It's an argument that attempts to prove the reasonable belief in the existence of God based on the universe, world, creation, etc. It comes from the word, obviously, cosmos, the cosmological argument. And this one's kind of fascinating because it's traced all the way back to Aristotle, but a lot of people credit it to Thomas Aquinas, who was a 13th century brilliant thinker, one of the most brilliant thinkers who really shaped the West and belief in the West, not just Christian belief, but the Enlightenment and the world and modern culture. He was a 13th century philosopher, theologian, and priest. And there are different types of cosmological arguments. That's why this can be a little bit confusing. And once again, I have nowhere near the time to dive into this. That's why I say you need to look this up for yourself. It's fascinating and it's helpful. There's different kinds of cosmological arguments because what it does is simply attempts to prove the existence of God by saying the fact that something is there, exists, the fact that there's a world, makes it reasonable to believe that there is God. But maybe the most common version of the cosmological argument is the argument from what's called contingency. The argument from contingency. And so what the argument from contingency means in terms of the cosmological argument is the fact that there is a creation. And this is important and helpful, especially when talking with unbelievers or, trying to find common ground with people, because almost no matter who you talk to, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, I don't know what I am, almost anyone you talk to, they will agree that there is something. Okay, can we start there? Everyone, raise your hand if you believe that there is something that exists, if existence is around. I know some of y'all are gonna be the contrarian. Oh, well, we can go super deep, okay, But almost no matter who you talk to, they're okay, something is here. And so it's a common ground, right? Something exists, so we can start there, okay? It's a good argument, right? Even Republicans and Democrats agree on this, okay? Something exists, okay? It's that obvious. Something exists. So the argument goes a little bit something like this, that we live in an existence that came into being. We agree with that. Logic would say that anything that came into being had a cause or was contingent on something. Something brought that into being. Therefore, is it more reasonable to believe that there is a creation, that there is a creator, or not? If there is a creation, is it more reasonable, logically, to believe that there is a creator, or there's not? It's a very simple question. But it's a question that I think that most people haven't actually considered. That if there is existence, and this was important in my journey, I was like, okay, so, I grew up in church and I believe what the Bible says, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth and God created everything. I believe that. That makes sense, right? I went through a season where I had some doubts, but it makes sense. But I began to try to think, okay, so, but if I'm not gonna believe that, right? If I'm gonna be agnostic maybe, which is probably what a lot of people go to, which, atheism is a belief that there is no God. Agnosticism is a belief that we can't know if there is a God or not. We're just not sure. I think it's kind of a cop-out, but that's kind of what it is, right? That's what a lot of people go to. It's probably what I would have gone to. But I was like, but then I would have to believe and live my life in accordance with the reality that this is all here and that something came from nothing. I want to kind of illustrate this here really quick. Do me a favor. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes for a minute. Close your eyes. Think really happy thoughts. Keep your eyes closed. Keep your eyes closed. Keep your eyes closed. Okay, now open your eyes. You guys will never believe what just happened. You would never believe this. This just appeared out of nowhere. I promise. Like when your eyes were closed, I was just like reading my notes and boom. I love this. I could have picked anything and I picked an Igloo old school, like I love this lemonade on fire. I love this, And what's interesting, I think why the cosmological argument is so compelling for faith and belief in God is because here's what normally happens, right? Because I have a feeling maybe you don't believe. You're a skeptic about if this thing just appeared right here out of nowhere for no reason. You probably don't believe that, okay? And I think what happens for a lot of people is, especially in our modern day, is if there's like a skeptic or agnostic or atheist and they're kind of sitting right there and they walk in the room or whatever and I say, dude, you won't believe, like this just appeared out of nowhere, I promise, it just showed up. No one put it there, it just happened, They're gonna say, John, like I don't believe that, You're like, well, why not? And they're like, well, because I'm not like a dumb religious person. I don't believe things just pop out of nowhere, like it didn't happen, And a lot of times when people read the Bible, let's be honest, think about Thomas Jefferson. People read the Bible, they're intrigued by it, they like the grand narrative, they maybe even get on board with the morality. And yet for most modern people, the problem with the Bible, and maybe even what makes them doubt it, is the miracles, right? Like, you ever been reading like the Old Testament, you're like, man, that's pretty miraculous. God like literally parts the Red Sea and they escape. Or you get to the Gospels and you read about Jesus and it's like Jesus opens a blind guy's eyes, raises the lame to walk, the deaf to hear, heals a withered man's hand. And we're like, I maybe could have gotten on board with this, but then you start talking about all this miracle stuff appearing out of nowhere for no reason. And I just don't believe in that because I don't believe in miracles. I do not believe in miracles because I'm smart, I'm secular, and I'm modern. I believe in miracles. But then you ask them the question, okay, so where did the universe come from? They're like, just came out of nowhere. We call it the Big Bang. It's kind of the new name for it, Sounds like my 5-year-old named it right, the Big Bang, We say the universe came out of nowhere for no cause, just happened. And so now all of a sudden, the people that might say that they don't believe in miracles actually have to believe in the biggest miracle that there could ever be. When I was considering this back in the day, I remember thinking, I would have to believe in miracles even more so if I'm not a believer in God, because, if I believe in an eternal God that's always been, and he created the world, that's kind of miraculous, right? But it makes sense. But if I were to believe that there was no God, and at one point supposedly there was nothing, and that nothing exploded for no reason, it became everything, I'm like, I just had that place. I don't believe that. I don't think this came from nothing for no reason and from no design. And another apologetic that's very compelling is called the Teleological Argument, which basically is the same thing, which says that not only should we believe in God because there is something instead of nothing, but the fact that this something is very well organized. There's no reason to believe if something just exploded for no reason, even if that did happen, that it would be organized and life would make sense and there would be gravity and everything would have order. The only reason we can know what science is or study anything is because science creates a sense of order. Things always seem to work out this way. There's some kind of order. But even if something was created, there's no reason why that would even have order. And so what I find so fascinating is you might talk to someone who maybe isn't sure where things come from, but without knowing the cause or the order of the situation that created the universe, because we don't know what caused it, if we come from an atheist perspective or agnostic perspective. But now we are forced to believe in the universe being one big miracle, but you actually don't believe in miracles, so it actually forces you to become a believer in God, ironically. And so the cosmological argument says that when we consider that something exists, is it more reasonable? I can't definitively prove it, but is it more reasonable to believe that there's a creator or there's not? Now, a couple rebuttals really quick, because I want to be honest with this, right? We want to have a real conversation, right? And I think a lot of the rebuttals are typically not good, but there are two rebuttals that I do think are things that we have to think about as believers in God. The first one I don't want to spend too much time on because it's one of those really deep conversations. The whole sermon could be on this, but it's but who created God then? So if everything is contingent, if you're saying there has to be a creator because there's a creation, well, if God is there, is he contingent on something? But what apologists will point out is that actually you don't have to answer that question to prove that God created this world, that an answer doesn't have that kind of answer, right? Our basic question that we're studying is, does this creation have a creator, okay? And so without answering, where did God come from, you can still answer, it is more likely, or believe it's most likely that there's a creator. But also, and this is super deep and super matrixy, and so, just whatever, looks up on your own. The problem with asking the question about who created God is you get into what's called infinite regress. We're there's something, then something, there's something, there's something, which means ultimately there is nothing. And so what Thomas Aquinas says is that rationally what you have to believe is that at some point there is what's called an unmoved mover. That for there to be creation, right, there's a creation, there's a creator, but at some point there has to be a beginning point and an ultimate eternal creator. And you're like, well, I don't understand that. I could explain that more, but go online, look it up for yourself, because I want to get to this next rebuttal, which I actually think is the most fascinating one. And this is the one that I remember thinking of back in the day, and I was like, okay, so if this is true, then we might have a problem. Because what some might say is this, okay, the easiest way and the way that people would get around this argument for the longest time is they would say this, but maybe the universe and everything just always existed. That's a big argument, and that's a good argument, if we're honest. Because if you can make the case that everything that is has just kind of always been, then you don't need an unmoved mover, as Aquinas said. So once again, if you can just prove that somehow this has always been, that there wasn't a creation point, then yeah, you get rid of the need to believe in God. It's a solid objection. If you can prove the universe has just always been existing, then the cosmological argument doesn't mean much. An argument from contingency isn't valid if it wasn't contingent on something in the first place. But this is where it gets really fascinating. And this is where actually modern science is actually beginning to really prove the existence of God. And I'm telling you, most people don't realize this. A lot of apologists even talk about the discoveries in the 20th century in science. We don't realize yet how big they are in this conversation about the existence of God. Because in the 20th century, there was a series of fascinating discoveries that actually make the cosmological argument an incredible defense for the existence of God. In 1915, maybe you've heard of a guy named Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein presents his groundbreaking theory of general relativity, E equals mc squared. And once again, super deep, but he basically gave us the ability to talk mathematically and scientifically about the past history and the future history of the universe, how time and space are connected. It was a groundbreaking discovery. And what happened is, after he made this discovery, scientists Alexander Friedman and George Lemaitre, who were working off of Einstein's equation, and we've heard this before, but back then this was groundbreaking, right? This was just in the early 1900s. These two scientists, working off of Einstein's theory of general relativity, they began to run the numbers, and they were like, hey guys, this is gonna sound crazy, okay? And people thought they were crazy. They were like, but working off what Einstein said in this theory, we think the universe is expanding. And you realize, in that time, that was an incredible thought. The universe is literally expanding. Have you ever thought about that and felt like that's crazy? Raise your hand. Have you ever thought about that? The universe expanding? You're like, wow. Oh, that's normal for all you guys? That's not crazy? Like, no, I always thought that. Yeah, it's expanded. Cool. Duh, right? That's amazing. You wouldn't think that. You would have never thought that. I wouldn't have thought that. And they're like, guys, we're running, like everything that we know says that, like, mathematically, the universe is expanding. And then in 1929, the dam breaks. When Edwin Hubble, whom the Hubble telescope is named after, measured the redshift and light from distant galaxies, and I have no idea what that even means, but that's what it says, okay, in my textbook, okay? And what he proved, this is fact today, that this empirical evidence proved that not only, get this, is the universe expanding, but also it proves, get this, that the universe sprang into being from a single point in a finite past. That the universe sprang into being, it's not the Bible, it's science. The universe sprang into being from a single point in a finite past. And so now what we know scientifically is that our universe has not always been, and it came into being, and that is a recent discovery. And so what you're seeing is how modern science is saying, listen, the cosmological argument is a force to be reckoned with, because I would have thought the only thing that could really get me to not believe in a creator is to believe that this has just always been. And when I began to read that, I personally came to a place where I was like, listen, I just can't believe that this all just happened for no reason and for no point. And so this is not only fascinating that we live in a universe that we all agree now was created or was started at some point, but it actually makes the cosmological argument stronger, and I believe rationally the most logical thing to believe. To continue to be an atheist or agnostic when you know that there was a beginning and a cause, and the Bible says that there was a beginning and a cause, and the simplest explanation of this is God, which takes you back also to what's called the ontological argument, which says that you should rationally believe in God because he's the greatest thing your mind can fathom, because your mind cannot fathom things that do not exist. And now there have been people that have gone back and forth in this debate. I'm not going to lie about that. But think about something that doesn't exist. You can't do it. Like, think about something that doesn't exist, right? You're like, oh, well, a blue unicorn, Well, yeah, but blue and horses exist with horns, right? Like, you're just putting things together that exist together. And so he says the fact that we can even comprehend God, which also brings you back to what's like Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is probably the right explanation, most likely. And so all these things keep pointing back in the same direction. And so Richard Swinburne, one of the greatest apologetics and philosophers of the 20th century, wrote a great book that I read in college called The Existence of God. He says this is important to know, that God logically has all of the properties to explain the universe. Think about that. So whether or not it's true, it's a fact that the concept of God has all of the properties to explain the universe. That if God is real, then we can understand why the world would be created and why miracles would exist and why there would be mountains and why there's eternity, past and future, that like you might not believe it, but it makes sense coherently. And what he says is that atheism, agnosticism, humanism, and so on and so forth, they don't have the properties to explain everything. That they're more based upon just not believing in something than what it actually claims to believe. That yeah, okay, maybe you're atheist and you don't believe in God, but there is no explanation for the universe. And so the cosmological argument, as well as other apologetic arguments, point us to the reasonable belief in God and that he exists. But here's the crazy thing about it too. It also brings you closer to the God of the Bible. If you believe in the merit of the cosmological argument or the argument from contingency, then this argument actually draws you closer to the God of the Bible, not farther. And so I want to spend a few minutes just breaking down a few passages, meditating on these with you as we consider these things that we're thinking about today. And the first is obviously, got to start here, Genesis 1:1. It'll be up on the screen. Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And it's a simple verse, and it's, for many of us, maybe the first verse we ever learned. But it's exactly what you would expect. It's exactly what you would expect if there was a universe that at some point came into being out of nothing. If the world was created, then it would make sense to hear, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I love this because the Bible answers the big questions. It doesn't avoid them. It says there was a beginning of what we call life and creation in the universe. It tells us that God was there in the beginning. He's the unmoved mover. He is the eternal. It tells us that there is a creator God, that God created the heavens, which means skies, and the earth. And so as we consider the cosmological and contingent arguments for the existence of God, we see that Genesis 1:1 is exactly what you would expect to find in the Bible. We are looking for a creator because there is one. We're looking for a God who would have the power and authority to be the creator. And the Bible says there is one. We're looking for a creator outside of our space and time who is eternal. And there is one. And we're looking for a creator that made the world purposefully and with meaning. Because deep down, I think that's what we think. And there is one. And then go to Psalm 19. Psalm 19, verses 1-4. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech," meaning it's speaking, "and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." And so there is a universe, there is a creation, there is something. And as we consider this belief, the cosmological argument says that creation points to the existence of God. But here's the cool thing: by design. That it was made to do this. The heavens, the skies declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day, it pours out speech. It's speaking to us. Creation is speaking to you. You're not crazy when you're in nature and it draws you to God. You're not crazy. It's not a fluke. It's not random. It's designed this way. And so creation, Psalm 19 says, not only points to God, but it is designed to point to God. Creation and the universe are meant to be an apologetic for the existence of God that draws you to God. And so all that to say is this, is like we're not just like really smart humans who figured out, whoa, like creation, that means there must be a God. Like we're not that smart. It's like, whoa, look at the mountains. That must mean that God exists. Like it was meant to be that way from the very beginning. The creation was designed that it is speaking to us of the existence of God. God's like, yeah, the Grand Canyon makes you think about me. I made it that way, Einstein. It's so funny. It's like, imagine like our church and our campus. Like you come here, right? And we get this all the time. I always hear this, right? This is, I guess, one of the reasons why we're doing like the Here to Stay and fixing up our campus or whatever, because like people will like see the church online or whatever, and be invited by somebody, and they show up to the building and they get outside the building and they're like, this is not what I expected, right? This is a lot older than I thought, right? This is like old school. I hear it all the time. And then they come in, they go to the kids' building, and they come in here and they're like, oh, okay, I see, okay. And so you could know nothing about our church whatsoever, nothing about us. And just by simply the way the building looks and the way it's set up, the way everything is laid out, you're like, okay, this is like an older church that has a pastor and is trying to make a comeback. That's exactly what we are, right? It's just obvious. It's just, you look, it's like, okay, I get it, old building, cool lights, I get it, right? Okay? Replant, that's what this is. And I don't even got to tell you that. And the world is like that. Like, the sky is incredible. The sky is vastly underrated. Go look at the sky for 10 minutes. And I think you begin to realize that to not believe in God, to not believe in a creator, that's ignoring what we sense in reality. We're trying to talk ourselves out of it at some point. That it's not just an emotional plea when I say, look at the sky, or look at the mountains, or look at your child, or just think about your life and whether or not you have a deep sense that you have purpose and meaning. That like I'm not just appealing to emotions. I'm just saying, man, if we all kind of naturally sense that, shouldn't we just go with that? If we feel like it's a good thing to drink water and to eat food, if we feel like life has purpose, if we want there to be purpose, if we believe in love, if we believe in beauty, if we believe in all these things have meaning, then we're not just some random, meaningless evolutionary process, that we've got to unbelieve a lot of things to get to that point. And then lastly, my favorite passage today is Exodus chapter 3. This is so baller. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, it's the moment where Moses is talking to the burning bush and God's appearing to him in the burning bush. And it says, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. That's baller, okay? I am. And that's pretty deep when you think about it, because what God is saying is that I am, meaning I am the eternal one. That I'm not going to give you a random name to define my place in this world, because I created all of the world. That everything else revolves around me. I am. I am. I created everything. I've always been. I always will be. Everything revolves around me. I am. And what he's saying is, because in this moment it was a polytheistic culture that believed in lots of different gods, and what he's saying here is, I am the one true God. I'm the creator. I'm the sustainer. I am. And so we see the eternality of God. And so today, as we consider the reason for God, the logic for God, the reality of if there is a creation, if there is something, are we going to believe that there is a creator or there is not a creator? The cosmological argument makes an incredible proof that says it is reasonable, it is more reasonable to believe in God. But the big question today is this: how do you go from that to believing that Jesus is God? I mean, that just proves that there's a creator God. That gets us to that point. But how do we get to Jesus being God? Yet the argument that C.S. Lewis makes in Mere Christianity is actually not that hard or complex to get there. C.S. Lewis wrote Mere Christianity in the 20th century, one of the best-selling Christian books of all time. Highly recommend you read it. And really what he does is explain essentially like Tim Keller does in The Reason for God, just the reason for faith and the reason for Jesus, and not like, hey, just believe it because the Bible tells me so. Not just that, right? But like, hey, let me tell you why, based upon how humans interact and what we naturally believe, why you should believe that Jesus is God. And he says you only got to ask two questions. First is, does God exist? Got to define that, which we've been talking about today. C.S. Lewis goes more of the moral argument route, which means that men naturally believe in right and wrong. And so if there is right and wrong, there has to be a God that defines right and wrong. He also goes to the cosmological argument at a couple points where like there's a creation, so there's a creator. So he says, firstly, you got to decide, is there a God? Okay, we get to that point. There is a God. There is a creator. Lastly, so if God exists, then who is God? You got one more question you got to ask. And you might say, well, maybe he's unknowable, but Lewis says that's not likely because if you create something, you most likely create that thing because you want to interact with it and have a relationship with it. You don't go paint an incredible painting to go put it in your hot garage and never do anything with it, ever. You would never do that. And so the fact that God creates the world means he wants to know the world, and so it's reasonable to believe that God has revealed himself, and then you just got to consider the few people that have claimed to be God and evaluate, well, which one is it? And there's really not that many in human history. Muhammad, Buddha, Genghis Khan, Thomas Edison, I don't know. There's a few like Jeff Bezos, there's a few astounding figures in human history, right? I threw Amazon in there, I got you, But let's be honest, and I'm gonna put my preacher hat on right now, okay? Because I know I am biased, but like undeniably one stands above the rest, and that's the case that C.S. Lewis makes. I want to be reasonable, but there's no comparison in human history, historically speaking. So is it reasonable to believe that Jesus is this God? The first thing is he claimed to be God. You got to start there. He claimed to be God. If you're going to be God, you got to claim to be God, okay? That's number one. And not that many people have made that claim. Matthew 16, it says, now when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? He's asking, who are they saying that I am? And they said, well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And he said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, meaning you are God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. That Jesus claimed to be God. That Jesus, also claimed by his followers, was resurrected from the dead. And they never found the body. Still looking, maybe, right? They never found the body. This movement springs up. It's blown up 2,000 years ago, and they could have easily just found the body. The Jewish religious officials, the Roman authorities could have easily found the body. Hey, this is where it was. This is the proof. This person saw him. He never got up, right? So he claims to be God, resurrects from the dead. The book that points to him, the Bible, is the best-selling book of all time, the most read book of all time. And if you were to be an alien and drop into this world out of nowhere and said, I need one book, you would be given the Bible. It's the only book that you would be given. And Jesus never wrote any of it. There's a lot of religious texts out there, and most of those religious texts are written by the one that claims to be the God of that religious text, and most of those religious texts are written by one author in one time period, but the Bible, which points to Jesus, was written by over 40 different authors across 3 different continents, across 1,000 different years, and Jesus himself, in his flesh, never wrote a single word of it. There's no one like Jesus. And the church that he founded is the most successful organization the world has ever known. 2,000 years ago it began. It's never been defeated. Started with a ragtag group of people. It's gone all across the world. Anyone that loves leadership or organization, Jesus is the king of that. Nobody has done what Jesus has done. It's the single largest people group the world has ever known in the history of civilization. And more people have followed Jesus and believe that he is God than anybody else. 2 billion people in the world today claim to be Jesus followers today. There's nobody like Jesus. And yet as we draw to a close today, of all the things that we can talk about today and of all the reasons that we have to believe that not only that God is real, but that Jesus is ultimately God, what I'm about to tell you might be the most astounding thing that you hear today. Because in spite of all of the evidence and all the reason that we have for God's existence, for Jesus' deity, it is almost unbelievable how he responds to us when after all of that, we still have doubts. And I've still got some questions, you know? Got questions. And y'all are lucky that I'm not Jesus, and I'm lucky that you're not Jesus, because I'm just speaking for myself right here. If I create a universe out of the goodness of my heart, and I gave that creation free will so that it could make its choices and it could love me back as I loved it, and it used that free will to turn against me and to walk away and to run away and to disobey me, and then after it rebelled against me and ran away from me, I took on flesh, come into the world, God, fully man, into the world, Jesus, to die on the cross and to live a perfect life and then die for the sins of the world and then to rise again to new life and to appear before some people, and you still got some questions? You're still not sure? You're still gonna think that this came out of nowhere? If I was God, I would say, forget you, okay? Forget you. I would have flooded the earth all over again. Like I would have. But I'm not God. And there's a story in John 20, famous story of Thomas who had some doubts, had some questions, walked with Jesus, saw everything that he'd done, saw the miracles, saw miraculous things, and still had a hard time believing that Jesus was God. And there's this moment where he begins to hear that Jesus is resurrected, and he's like, I don't believe it. I don't buy it. He was one of the 12, and he didn't believe it. This isn't Judas. This is a different guy. John 20, starting in verse 24, it says, Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, We have seen the Lord. But he said to them, Unless I see his hands, the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. It's a pretty bold claim for someone that walked with Jesus and saw him crucified for his sins and saw the miracles. But verse 26 says, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. And although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, Peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. And Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have seen and not yet believed, and yet have believed." And one thing I think we don't realize about this is that as Jesus appears resurrected before them, all authority, all power, can do anything. I mean, he was crucified, bloodied, and now he's before them, healed and new and resurrected. We read that story, we don't realize he left the mark in his hand. He could have healed that. He left it there on purpose. He left the mark in his side where the spear pierced him. And he left it for Thomas, because he knew that Thomas was going to have some questions, you know. And in this moment, Jesus is showing us what he's like when we have doubts or when we have questions. That your doubt isn't dirty. It's not something that God can't work with. It's not something that God can't answer. It's not something God can't heal. And I think so often we think doubt is like the unforgivable sin, but it's not. That Jesus is patient with us, that Jesus can work with us, that Jesus, I love how the song says, he understands us. He knows you live in a broken world, and he knows you've got emotions, and he knows life has highs and life has lows. He went through all of it. That whenever you doubt him, he's not up there about to walk away from you. He's not giving up on you, even though maybe you're tempted to give up on him. Because his love is strong, and his love is patient, and his love is consistent. And he will go through the process with you if you will bring your doubts to him, because the same way that Thomas was invited by Jesus to touch the marks on his hands, we are invited when we doubt to touch the faith, to draw near to God, to draw near to the church, to draw near to the Bible, to draw near in prayer, to draw near to community. Because what we do is we have questions and we walk away. And then we think we have doubts, or we think we don't believe, but in reality, our problem isn't doubts. We're just spiritually apathetic. We don't look for God. We don't see God. We don't read the Bible. We don't pray. And then we wonder why we don't feel God. But instead, God invites us to bring our doubts to him in patience. And so maybe you're here today, and maybe you've got some questions, and you're not sure. What do? You draw near to Jesus, because he is God, because he can lead you through this process, because he's revealed to you that it's reasonable to believe in him, because there's nobody like him. And above everything else, because he created you, and he created this world, and because he loves you, and that's true. And you can believe you're a meaningless piece of matter in this universe that's going to die and forever just be forgotten. But you don't have to believe that, because that's not true. God loves you. God created you. God is speaking to you through the skies and through your life and through your ups and through your downs and the noise and in the quiet. He's speaking to you. So draw near to him. And don't doubt. Believe.